The moving truck pulled away from the curb, leaving me alone in front of my new home. I could not believe it was finally mine. After years of overtime shifts, careful saving, and countless sacrifices, I had achieved what once seemed impossible. I owned a house. Not just any house, but a charming 3-bedroom in Oakwood Estates, a peaceful suburban neighborhood with tree-lined streets and manicured lawns that seemed to whisper promises of stability and belonging. I walked up the concrete path to my front door, keys jingling in my hand. The April sun warmed my face as I paused to take in the moment. The house was modest compared to some others on the block, but it was perfect to me. Fresh white paint, navy blue shutters, and a small front porch where I could already envision myself enjoying morning coffee and evening sunsets. This was not just a purchase. This was a statement, a declaration that I belonged here just as much as anyone else. My first full day as a homeowner, I decided to introduce myself to the neighbors. I had always believed in building community. I put on a casual button-down shirt and my most approachable smile, then set out with a few small gift bags containing homemade cookies and my contact information. The elderly couple 3 doors down accepted my offering with thin smiles that did not reach their eyes. They thanked me without introducing themselves and quickly closed their door. Next door, a middle-aged man named Richard shook my hand firmly, but kept glancing over my shoulder as if eager for our interaction to end. He mumbled something about how the neighborhood had very specific standards that everyone needs to maintain. The statement hung in the air between us, loaded with unspoken meaning. I nodded politely and moved on, the weight of his words settling uncomfortably on my shoulders. It was during my walk back to my house that I first noticed her. A woman standing on her porch directly across the street. She had blonde, highlighted hair cut into a sharp bob and wore designer athleisure wear despite showing no signs of having exercised. Her arms were crossed tightly across her chest as she tracked my movements with narrowed eyes. I raised my hand in a friendly wave. She did not wave back. She did not smile. She simply watched, her gaze crawling over me like an unwelcome touch. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on settling in. I arranged furniture, hung artwork, and slowly transformed the house into my home. But each time I stepped outside, whether to collect mail or unload groceries from my car, I felt eyes on me. The woman across the street, whom another neighbor briefly referred to as Karen, seemed to materialize on her porch or at her window whenever I appeared. Her surveillance was constant and unnerving. Small irregularities began to accumulate. My trash bins, which I had carefully placed at the curb, would mysteriously be moved several feet away from my property line. Packages that tracking numbers showed as delivered would vanish, only to appear hours later, placed at odd angles against my garage door instead of the porch. Once I found my newspaper unwrapped and deliberately soaked, though there had been no rain. I tried to dismiss these occurrences as coincidences or perhaps normal suburban quirks I was not yet accustomed to. I had worked too hard for this home to let paranoia taint my achievement. So when the internet technician arrived 3 days after move-in, I greeted him with enthusiasm, eager to establish this essential service and continue building my new life. "All right, sir, your Wi-Fi is all set up and running," the technician said, handing me a card with login information. "I have set it with a default password, but I recommend changing it to something personal that you will remember. You have full admin access through this portal." I thanked him and immediately logged in, changing the network name to something meaningful to me and creating a strong, unique password. It felt good, another small way of making this space truly mine. I had no idea that this simple, private act would become the match that lit the fuse of neighborhood warfare. No idea that across the street, Karen was already seething at the disappearance of a Wi-Fi network she had long considered her personal property. The knock came at 7:50 the next morning, sharp and insistent. I had just poured my first cup of coffee and was still in my bathrobe, unprepared for visitors. Through the peephole, I saw her, the woman from across the street, shifting impatiently on my porch, her painted fingernails tapping against her thigh. My stomach tightened. Something told me this was not a belated welcome to the neighborhood. I opened the door just enough to greet her, maintaining the barrier between us. "Good morning," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Can I help you?" Karen's smile was tight and did not reach her eyes. "Hi there, new neighbor. I am Karen Whitfield, Neighborhood Welcome Committee and HOA Board Secretary." She extended a manicured hand, which I reluctantly shook. Her grip was brief and cold. "I am just stopping by to address a little situation that came up overnight," she continued, attempting to peer around me into my home. "It seems there has been some disruption to our neighborhood's shared network infrastructure." I furrowed my brow, genuinely confused. "Shared network? I'm not sure I understand." Karen's facade of friendliness slipped slightly. "The Wi-Fi, of course. My son came to me quite upset last night because he could not access the free internet he has been using for his schoolwork. The network, called HomeNet 52, is suddenly password protected." Her tone suggested I had committed some grievous community offense. Realization dawned slowly. "That is my network," I said carefully. "The technician set it up yesterday, and yes, I changed the default password because it is my private connection that I pay for." Karen's expression hardened. "Well, that network address has been available to this street for years. The previous owners understood the importance of community resources. We have an understanding in Oakwood Estates." I stood straighter, my patience wearing thin. "I am sorry if there was some arrangement with the previous owners, but this is my home now, and that is my internet service. I have no obligation to provide free Wi-Fi to the neighborhood." Karen's cheeks flushed pink. "Listen," she said, dropping all pretense of warmth, "things work a certain way here. We all play nice and share certain amenities. Those who do not wish to participate find that living here becomes difficult." The threat in her words was unmistakable. "I appreciate the welcome," I responded firmly, "but my network security is not up for discussion. Have a good day." I closed the door before she could respond, my heart pounding. Through the window, I watched her march back across the street, phone already pressed to her ear. That evening, I was in the middle of a video call with my sister when my screen froze. The internet connection had dropped completely. I rebooted the router, checked all connections, but nothing restored service. Finally, I called the provider's technical support. After 20 minutes of verification questions and troubleshooting attempts, the representative's voice took on a confused tone. "Sir, according to our records, you requested a complete service cancellation this afternoon at approximately 2:15 p.m. "What? I never requested any cancellation," I said, alarm rising in my chest. "The request came through our customer service line. The caller provided your account number and the security verification information." The representative paused uncomfortably. "Would you like me to reinstate your service? There will be a reconnection fee of $75. I closed my eyes, Karen's warning echoing in my mind. This was deliberate. Someone had impersonated me to disconnect my service as punishment for not sharing my Wi-Fi password. The pettiness was staggering, but the implication was deeply disturbing. How had they obtained my account information? What else might they do? "Yes, please reinstate it immediately," I said, anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. "And I would like to add additional security measures to my account. Password protection, security questions, the works." That night, I sat in my darkened living room, staring out at Karen's brightly lit house across the street. In the glow of my phone screen, I began researching Oakwood Estates' HOA regulations and homeowner rights in our county. The pride I had felt just days ago had transformed into something harder, more determined. This was not just about Wi-Fi anymore. It was about dignity, about standing my ground. Karen had fired the first shot in what she clearly expected to be a quick surrender on my part. She could not have been more wrong. I was not going anywhere, and I was certainly not going to be intimidated in my own home. If this was how the neighborhood welcomed newcomers, they were about to learn I was not easily scared away. 3 days later, a technician from a different company installed new internet service at my home. I paid extra for the fastest available speed and added every security feature offered. The new router was set up with two-factor authentication, automated alerts for any access attempts, and a password that would make a cybersecurity expert proud. This time, I watched the technician carefully, making sure no one observed the installation from outside. "Is there any way someone could cancel this service without my explicit permission?" I asked as he packed up his tools. The technician looked surprised. "Not if you set up the security properly. I would recommend calling the company directly and establishing voice recognition and a verbal password for any account changes. He hesitated, then added, "Have you had problems with service tampering?" I nodded grimly. "You could say that." After he left, I installed a small lockbox around the external connection point, an additional precaution against physical tampering. That evening, I methodically set up a documentation system, a detailed spreadsheet for logging incidents with timestamps, descriptions, and corresponding evidence. I positioned my phone near the window, ready to record any suspicious activity. The official-looking envelope arrived in my mailbox the next morning. The letterhead read, "Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association," in embossed blue letters. The contents made my blood run cold. Dear homeowners, it has come to the attention of the Oakwood Estates HOA Board that your property is in violation of Community Covenant Section 12.3 regarding network integrity and shared digital infrastructure. Disruption of established community systems is expressly prohibited under bylaws established in 2015. You have seven days to restore previous arrangements or face escalating penalties, including, but not limited to, fines of $100 day, property liens, and possible legal action. Sincerely, Karen Whitfield, HOA Board Secretary. I immediately pulled up the HOA documents I had received during the closing process. There was no Section 12.3, nothing about network integrity or shared digital infrastructure appeared anywhere in the covenants. The letter was completely fabricated, designed to intimidate me with official-sounding language and threats. The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community center. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a pressed shirt and slacks, documentation in hand. As residents filed in, I noticed their curious glances and whispered comments. Karen arrived last, flanked by two older men in golf attire. She froze momentarily when she saw me, then whispered something to her companions. When I approached the sign-in table, one of the men stepped forward. "This is a closed meeting for board members and invited homeowners only," he said, his tone dismissive. "I am a homeowner," I replied, keeping my voice even, "and I have received a compliance notice I need to discuss." "We have a formal process for disputes," Karen interjected smoothly. "You need to submit a written request for a hearing, which will be reviewed at the next quarterly assessment meeting." "When is that meeting?" I asked. "December," she replied with a thin smile. They were stonewalling me, using bureaucratic tactics to prevent me from challenging Karen's fraudulent letter. I left without causing a scene, but my resolve hardened. That night, I ordered 4 high-definition security cameras with night vision capability and motion detection. Within days, they were strategically positioned around my property. The investment proved worthwhile sooner than expected. At 1:17 a.m. 5 days later, my phone buzzed with a motion alert. The backyard camera had detected movement. I watched the live feed with growing disbelief as a figure in dark clothing crept along my fence line. Even in the green-tinted night vision, Karen's distinctive bob haircut was unmistakable. She was carrying something small in her hand, poking at the junction box near my air conditioning unit. I hit record, capturing every second as she manipulated something near my electrical connections. After several minutes, she retreated hastily when the motion-activated security light switched on. By morning, I had downloaded and backed up the footage to multiple secure locations. That same day, I installed additional cameras covering every approach to my house. I set up a comprehensive firewall on my network and changed all my passwords for every online account. I was no longer just defending my home. I was gathering evidence for what was beginning to feel like an inevitable legal battle. Karen's casual cruelty and entitlement had awakened something in me, a determination that went beyond anger. This woman believed she could drive me out through intimidation and harassment. She thought I would crumble under pressure, that I would be an easy target. She had gravely miscalculated. Every line she crossed only strengthened my resolve to uncover what was really happening in Oakwood Estates. The hunt for answers began with a simple signal strength test. Using a Wi-Fi analyzer app on my phone, I methodically walked the perimeter of my property, tracking unusual signal patterns. Near the northwest corner, where my yard met Karen's property line, the readings spiked unexpectedly. Something was amplifying signals in that area. Under the guise of gardening, I carefully examined the area. Partially buried beneath mulch and ornamental rocks sat a small, weatherproof box with a tiny antenna. It was a signal repeater, a device designed to extend Wi-Fi range. Careful not to disturb it, I photographed it from multiple angles, noting the serial number visible on its exterior. Back inside, I researched the device model. It was a commercial-grade repeater, typically used by businesses to extend network coverage across large areas. This was not consumer-level equipment. Someone had intentionally installed professional hardware to siphon internet connections from multiple homes. I mapped signal strengths throughout the neighborhood and discovered 3 more repeaters strategically placed to create a mesh network centered on Karen's house. The previous owners of my home had unknowingly provided a primary hub for this unauthorized network. But I suspected my house was not the only one being exploited. My suspicion drove me to the county record's office. The clerk seemed surprised by my request to view property deeds for the entire Oakwood Estates subdivision. "Research project," I explained with a casual smile. "I am interested in property values and ownership patterns." Hours of careful examination revealed something startling. The house Karen claimed as hers, 4572 Oakwood Drive, was listed under the name Elaine Whitfield, not Karen. According to the records, Elaine had passed away 3 years ago, and the property was currently in probate, awaiting resolution of an estate dispute between multiple heirs. Further digging uncovered more discrepancies. The HOA documents listed a K. Whitfield as board secretary, not the full Karen Whitfield she used when introducing herself. The signature on my warning letter did not match the signature on official HOA filings from previous years. The pieces were falling into place. Karen was likely a relative of the deceased homeowner, possibly staying in the house while the estate was in probate, but without legal ownership. She had assumed a position on the HOA board without proper election or authority. The Wi-Fi theft was just one component of a larger fraud. My next stop was a law office downtown. The attorney, Ms. Rivera, listened intently as I laid out my evidence. The falsified HOA letter, the security footage, the property records, and the unauthorized Wi-Fi equipment. "So she has been impersonating both the homeowner and an HOA official," Ms. Rivera clarified, taking detailed notes. "Yes, and using that false authority to intimidate neighbors and steal services," I confirmed. "The question is, how many others has she targeted, and how long has this been going on?" Ms. Rivera tapped her pen thoughtfully against her legal pad. "This goes beyond neighbor disputes. We are looking at potential fraud, identity theft, and harassment, possibly criminal impersonation." She looked up at me. "Are you prepared for what happens next? Once we start legal proceedings, this becomes very public. The neighborhood dynamics will change dramatically." I thought about the cold shoulders, the suspicious glances, the silent complicity that had allowed Karen's behavior to continue unchecked. I thought about what might happen to the next black family that moved into Oakwood Estates if no one stood up to this kind of treatment. "I am prepared," I said firmly. "What is our next step?" Together, we developed a 2-pronged strategy. First, formal cease and desist letters would go to both Karen and the legitimate HOA board members, detailing the fraudulent activities and demanding immediate corrective action. Second, we would prepare for a public disclosure at the next community meeting, with all evidence professionally organized and ready for presentation. "Document everything," Ms. Rivera emphasized as our meeting concluded. "Every interaction, every incident, time and date, everything. And whatever you do, do not confront her directly. Let the legal process work." I left her office with a strange mixture of dread and vindication. What had begun as a simple desire for home ownership had evolved into something much larger. I was no longer just fighting for my right to exist peacefully in this neighborhood. I was exposing a system of control and deception that had likely been operating unchallenged for years. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, organizing my evidence into clear, irrefutable documentation. Property records, HOA bylaws, photos of the Wi-Fi repeaters, security footage, all meticulously labeled and time-stamped. As I worked, I occasionally glanced out the window at Karen's house, wondering if she had any idea what was coming. The woman who thought she could drive me away through intimidation was about to discover just how thoroughly she had underestimated me. The community center hummed with low conversation as neighbors filed in for the monthly HOA meeting. I arrived early, setting up inconspicuously in the back row, a folder of documents resting on my lap. Karen stood near the front, chatting animatedly with board members, completely unaware of my presence. Her confidence was almost admirable, the easy entitlement of someone who had never been challenged. The meeting proceeded with mundane updates about landscaping contracts and community pool maintenance. When the board president finally asked, "Any new business?" I stood. "Yes," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the room. "I have a matter regarding HOA leadership and fraudulent communications." All heads turned. Karen's smile froze on her face. "The floor recognizes the gentleman from Maple Street," the president said uncertainly. I walked to the front, nodded politely to the board, and began. "My name is Marcus Johnson. I have recently received this letter." I held up the fabricated violation notice, signed by Karen Whitfield as HOA board secretary. "I have discovered this position is not legally held as no election records exist and the signature does not match official filings." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Karen's face flushed deep red. "Furthermore," I continued calmly, "public records show that 4572 Oakwood Drive is owned by the estate of Elaine Whitfield, currently in probate. No Karen Whitfield has legal residence or ownership status in this community." The board president leaned forward, squinting at the documents I presented. "These are serious allegations. Do you have proof of these claims?" "I do." I distributed folders to each board member. "County property records, probate court filings, and documentation of other unauthorized activities, including internet service theft via illegally installed signal repeaters." The room erupted in confused conversation. Karen pushed her way to the front, her voice shrill. "This is ridiculous. He is new here. He does not understand how things work." "Actually," I countered evenly, "I understand exactly how things have been working. And so does my attorney, who has prepared cease and desist orders for both Ms. Whitfield and the HOA board for enabling fraudulent representation." As if on cue, Ms. Rivera entered the room, nodding professionally to me before approaching the board with legal documents. The timing was perfect. We had planned this entrance for maximum impact. The following morning, I distributed informational flyers throughout the neighborhood. Not angry accusations, but simple facts, property records, HOA bylaws, and a timeline of events since my arrival. The flyer ended with my contact information and an invitation. "If you have experienced similar issues, please reach out. Together we can restore integrity to our community." The response was immediate and revealing. 3 neighbors called that day, sharing stories of Karen's previous intimidation tactics. One elderly resident admitted she had been paying Karen directly for HOA violation forgiveness for years. Another described how his questions about board decisions had resulted in mysterious damage to his property. That afternoon, Karen's true colors emerged fully. She stormed across the street, marching up my driveway as I washed my car. Her face was contorted with rage, all pretense of civility abandoned. "You have no idea what you have done," she shouted, gesturing wildly. "I built this neighborhood, I protected our values. People like you are ruining everything." I remained silent, my phone recording in my pocket as she continued her tirade, racial slurs now mixing freely with her threats. Neighbors emerged from their homes, witnessing her meltdown. When she finally exhausted herself, I spoke just one sentence. "The law applies to everyone, Karen, even you." That evening, I uploaded a carefully edited video to the neighborhood's social media page. It included security footage of Karen's trespassing, documentation of the Wi-Fi theft, and court records proving she had no legal claim to her residence. I narrated calmly, stating only verifiable facts without emotional accusations. By morning, the video had hundreds of comments. A local news reporter sent a message requesting an interview about neighborhood governance disputes. Another neighbor forwarded me an email chain showing board members frantically discussing liability issues and potential litigation. Karen had spent years cultivating an image of authority through intimidation and lies. It had taken just 1 week of methodical, factual exposure to begin dismantling her facade. The neighbors who had once averted their eyes now looked directly at me when we passed on the street. Some nodded. A few even smiled. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably, and everyone could feel it. The official eviction notice was served on a Tuesday morning. I watched from my front window as the process server handed Karen the documents. Even from across the street, I could see her hands trembling as she tore open the envelope. The county sheriff stood nearby, impassive and official. Karen's face cycled through emotions, shock, rage, disbelief, before settling into a mask of cold fury. She glanced toward my house, and our eyes met briefly through the glass. I did not look away. According to my attorney, the probate court had accelerated proceedings after learning of Karen's unauthorized occupation of the property. The rightful heirs, Elaine Whitfield's adult children living out of state, had been unaware that anyone was living in their mother's house. They had immediately filed for emergency eviction upon discovering the situation. The HOA board was facing its own reckoning. An emergency meeting had been called to address leadership irregularities and procedural violations. 3 board members had already resigned, citing personal reasons but clearly fleeing potential liability. The remaining members were scrambling to distance themselves from Karen's actions, claiming they had been misled about her official status. Neighbors who had once been intimidated by Karen now found their voices. Complaints poured in to legitimate authorities, reports of harassment, fraudulent fee collection, and unauthorized property access. Each new allegation reinforced the others, creating a damning pattern of behavior that no one could ignore. "You have started quite the neighborhood revolution," Ms. Rivera commented during our weekly update call. "The district attorney's office is considering criminal charges for identity theft and fraud." I took no pleasure in the chaos, but I did feel vindicated. This was not about revenge. It was about justice. About establishing that rules applied equally to everyone, regardless of how long they had controlled the narrative. 3 days after receiving the eviction notice, Karen made her final stand. News vans lined the street, tipped off about the impending removal. Reporters positioned themselves strategically, cameras ready. The scene was set for the final act in Karen's neighborhood drama. She did not disappoint. When the sheriff's deputies approached her door, Karen emerged with a megaphone, launching into a prepared speech about community values and outside agitators. She pointed repeatedly at my house, her voice cracking with emotion as she described how I had destroyed neighborhood harmony. The deputies listened patiently for several minutes before firmly instructing her to gather essential belongings. "This is my home," she screamed, abandoning the megaphone as her composure crumbled completely. "I have lived here for 7 years. I am on the HOA board." "Ma'am, according to court records, you have never been the legal resident or owner of this property," the lead deputy stated calmly. "You have 30 minutes to collect personal items before we secure the premises." Neighbors watched silently from porches and driveways as Karen was escorted to her car, clutching a hastily packed suitcase. News cameras captured every moment. I remained inside my home, observing quietly through the window blinds. There was no need to insert myself into the spectacle. The truth had done its work without further intervention from me. Later that evening, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Richard, my next-door neighbor who had been so cold during our first meeting. He stood awkwardly on my porch, hands in his pockets. "I owe you an apology," he said after a long pause. "I knew something was not right with Karen, but it was easier to go along than to question her. She made life difficult for anyone who crossed her." I nodded, understanding the complex dynamics that had allowed Karen's behavior to flourish. "We all make choices about when to speak up," I replied. "The important thing is that the truth eventually came out." "The HOA is holding a special election next month," Richard added. Properly managed this time with verification of all candidates. You should consider running for a position. I smiled but made no commitments. My goal had never been to replace one authority with another. I had simply wanted to live peacefully in my own home, secure in my rights as a homeowner. That goal now seemed within reach, as the neighborhood began the process of healing from years of manipulation and fear. The first real signs of spring emerged in Oakwood Estates. Daffodils pushed through soil, trees budded with tender green leaves, and neighbors who had once hurried past each other now stopped to chat. 3 weeks had passed since Karen's dramatic departure, and the community was slowly finding its new rhythm. The restructured HOA held its inaugural meeting with record attendance. Procedures were transparent, minutes were published promptly, and financial records were made available for review. The new board president, a retired judge named Helen, approached each issue with fairness and clarity. When my name was nominated for the vacant secretary position, I politely declined. I appreciate the confidence, I told the assembled neighbors, but my goal was never to take over leadership. I simply want to be part of a community where everyone is treated with respect and where rules are applied consistently. My house was feeling more like home each day. I repainted the front door a deep, confident blue. I planted rose bushes along the fence line, covering the spots where Karen's repeaters had once been hidden. I installed a proper security system, not out of fear, but as a statement of ownership and permanence. This space was mine, and I intended to protect it. One sunny Saturday, I set up a grill in my driveway and placed a folding table beside it. The aroma of barbecued chicken and spiced corn drew curious glances from passing neighbors. When an elderly couple slowed their walk to appreciate the smell, I waved them over. "I have plenty," I said, offering them plates. "Consider it a belated introduction to the neighborhood." Word spread quickly. Within an hour, my driveway had become an impromptu community gathering. Neighbors arrived with side dishes and drinks, introducing themselves properly for the first time. I learned names, heard stories about the neighborhood's history, and shared laughter that bridged the divides that had seemed so insurmountable just weeks before. Maria, a young mother from 2 streets over, pulled me aside during the gathering. "I need to thank you," she said quietly. "Karen targeted us when we first moved in, called the HOA about our children's bicycles in the front yard, complained about our holiday decorations. We were thinking of moving before all this happened." Similar stories emerged throughout the afternoon. Karen had systematically targeted newer residents, particularly families of color or those she perceived as not fitting her vision for the neighborhood. Her methods were always the same: intimidation, false authority, and isolation. As twilight settled over the gathering, Richard approached with a glass of lemonade. "You know, we're considering making this a monthly thing," he said, gesturing to the impromptu block party. "Community cookouts, rotating houses, helps everyone stay connected." I nodded, watching as children played tag on lawns that had once been forbidden territory. "Connection is important," I agreed. "Hard to manipulate people who talk to each other regularly." The cameras remained installed around my property, though they now served more as a symbol than a necessity. They represented vigilance, a reminder that peace required attention and care. The strong passwords and security measures on my Wi-Fi remained as well, not from paranoia, but from a healthy respect for boundaries. From my front porch that evening, I watched the last neighbors depart with waves and promises to keep in touch. The street was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the tense silence of surveillance and suspicion, but the comfortable quiet of a neighborhood at ease with itself. My battle with Karen had begun over something as simple as a Wi-Fi password, my right to secure what was mine. It had expanded into something much larger, a community's reckoning with the power structures it had allowed to develop unchecked. In standing my ground, I had not just protected my own space, but had helped restore balance to a neighborhood that had lost its way. As darkness fell completely, I looked across at the now empty house where Karen had once stood watching my every move. Soon, according to neighborhood gossip, the rightful heirs would be selling it to a young family eager to join our community. I silently wished them what everyone deserves: the simple dignity of belonging without fear, the right to exist without explanation, and neighbors who understand that true community strength comes not from control but from respect.